Welcome to the Well Off Podcast, where the goal is to motivate, inspire, and share success principles. I'm your host, George Almasri. On this episode, I interviewed Mike Beer, who's an accomplished real estate investor and focuses on investing in apartment buildings in Ontario. His mission is to enable each of his investors to provide their families with the financial future they truly deserve. And on this episode, we talked about how his family escaped from communist Poland and actually tricked him and his sister into leaving when they thought they were actually just going on a little vacation. And then we dove into how he presents ROI, return on investment, to his investors, how he pitches his deals, why he doesn't think you should pay off your mortgage. And then we also talk about the difference between 100 units versus 5 units versus 1 unit. A lot of times you hear people say that it's the exact same thing, but in his opinion, there is a serious difference between the mindset required to own more units. So I think you guys are really going to enjoy this piece and this episode with Mike Beer. If you do, make sure to share this with a friend or family member, and then leave us a review on whatever platform you're listening to this on. That would be greatly appreciated. If you want to connect with me, you can book a call on the website, welloff.ca, and I'm happy to discuss multi-unit investing with you. We have some pretty cool opportunities in the Niagara region and Golden Horseshoe, actually. So if you want to discuss getting into those types of properties, I'd be more than happy to do that. So there you go. Enjoy the episode. All right, I'm here with Mike Beer, who's joining me for the first time. Thank you for coming by, Mike.
Thanks for having me.
Great. I always start off by asking about your childhood. So we were kind of talking about this a little bit before we got started, but where'd you grow up, and maybe just one or two things you remember?
Oh, you know what? Childhood is actually pretty interesting. So I grew up in Poland, and at the time when we were there, it was communist. So basically empty stores, or if there's something in a store, there's a 2-hour lineup to get it. And then, so you'd line up and then ask the last person, what are we lining up for?
Really?
Right? It's just
what's the correlation between communism and like a lack of kind of supply?
I guess it's because it's most of the stores, I would say, are government owned.
Okay.
So yes, it's not very plentiful, right? It's they're not there to provide for the key people. They have their own agendas.
Okay.
So so I would say grew up in Poland, and my dad was a chief engineer on a cargo ship. So he used to be one of the very few people that would be able to leave the country. And he got special permission for us to leave on vacation, which was unheard of. So I was like the only kid in my entire grade school. I was 10 years old that would be able to leave the country. So we went to the passport office. Normal thing, we would bring like 2 kilograms of coffee to bribe the lady to get us passports. She takes the coffee, puts it behind the counter, and then boom, we got our passports pretty quickly.
Wow.
So we were going on vacation, and then halfway through, before the military police border, our parents, for some reason, tell me and my sister that we are actually not going on vacation. We're escaping the country illegally. So I don't know why you would tell a 10-year-old and a 16-year-old that, but it happened. My sister started crying because she left her boyfriend at home.
Oh, wow.
Right? So I was kind of confused, but we safely made it to Norway, and then from there stayed there for a little bit, and we got permission to come to Australia and then Canada. So the single reason for being in Canada is because my dad had one university friend in Canada, and that guy didn't even stay too long. He went to live in the Caribbean. So, and then I'm still here.
That's kind of hard to like wrap your head around, where you don't even have the right to leave the country. You know, like in Poland, you can't leave, you can't escape, you have to stay there.
At the time, yes.
Yeah,
at the time.
So crazy to think. Like it's hard to understand that. You know, it's weird being Canadian, and like born and raised, right?
It's a different world because it's a very Western country now that they're in the European Union for a very long time. But why am I telling you this? Because when we came to Canada, so my dad is a professional engineer, he was working in a factory and delivering pizza at night. So we would be eating like pizza three days a week, right? Which was frozen in the freezer.
Yeah.
And it's very humbling to see your parents do that for you, right? And then at the age of 11, I didn't know why the other kids had juice boxes, and then we didn't have juice boxes, right, with my sister, because they cost money. So that, I think, fueled a lot of the. It took a lot of the. I didn't have that entitlement when I came, and then I think that drives me kind of through my life. Just living, just taking the opportunity, and then not thinking that something is owed to me.
Sure. I don't know if, do you know who Sam McDaddy is? If you live in Mississauga, you have to know who he is.
I see him all over. I mean, you can't miss him.
I had him on the podcast recently, and he actually told me that his dad delivered pizzas too at one point in his life. And like, I guess kind of the pain of that, because he had a successful business, and then I think he went bankrupt, and then started delivering pizzas and whatever. So like the pain of all that kind of led to him wanting to work really hard and become successful. So it seems like that's a very common thing. Just the kids that grow up with a lot of financial pain make it a point to become successful financially.
You know what? It's mind-boggling, because in Poland, yes, we lived in an apartment building, but we always had slightly more than other kids, because my dad was working as a chief engineer on the ship, and then he left that and then kind of moved here. So definitely it does change people.
Yeah, for sure.
In a good way.
Yeah. A lot of good things can come from pain sometimes, right? Let's talk about your journey. How did this little boy from Poland comes here? How does he become a real estate investor?
You know what? I actually, that wasn't even on my mind for a while. All I wanted to do is, I thought I wanted to be a computer programmer.
Okay.
So I was extremely good at math for since a child. So I went to University of Waterloo, and I kind of got to know the KW area quite a bit. And then my wife was going to McMaster University, and one of her friends, he quit the bank after a while. He was working for a bank, and then he became a realtor. We had lunch, and then he said, you know what? I got 46 tenants. I thought, 46 tenants? I want to have 46 tenants.
Yeah.
So we went out to look. He said, we're going just for education purposes, so about 15 years ago or so. And we looked at a triplex, which was actually a fourplex, but a legal triplex. And he said, we're here to learn. Just you take a look at what we got in Hamilton. I bought it. Right away. Just felt like I wanted to kind of pull the trigger. So bought that, and then some student properties around McMaster University. That would be, and then some condos. It's somehow led to that. But just before that, I made one of the biggest mistakes. And I paid off my entire mortgage. So I did I paid off my entire mortgage before investing in a single property. So if you had to go back in time, don't do that. That's not a good use of money, paying off like a 4% or 5% mortgage, whatever it happened to be at the time.
Makes sense. And what was how did you go from these, like smaller multis and student rentals and whatever into the commercial multifamily space?
Well, a lot of pain, I would say, in the sense that going through different property managers and then buying increasingly. I would say I'm not the guy that has a story that goes out and then as his first property buys like 100-unit building. Because I know in the States some people do that, and I've heard of it. But I prefer to do things gradually. So I would buy smaller kind of multifamily, like the 7 and 8s. Before ever moving onto the bigger ones. And I was very fortunate to meet a mentor at one of the larger real estate events. And he had a fairly large fund. So after kind of talking to him for a while, I kept at it, trying to convince him because he didn't have any mentees at the time. And finally, his wife actually told him, you know what, this must be a sign, like energy's there, just go with it. So he started mentoring me. So we went through, I think it took me a year before that to buy like a multifamily building. It was a multifamily mix with commercial, but on from there, I think it progressed.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
If you're kind of mentoring someone today, would you recommend doing things gradually like you did, or would you tell people to like just go after a big building? You know, let's say they do have a portfolio of a smaller like single family homes or that sort of thing, because you hear different things from different people.
You know what? It's I would say it depends on you specifically, because for me, the idea of buying bigger properties was okay, but taking on other people's money, investor money, that made me very nervous, because I just, integrity is really key. And I didn't want, in order to buy the bigger properties, I needed to take on investor money. So I think the more responsible person in me said, let's just buy as much as you possibly can with your own money until you tap out, and then test everything on yourself, which was, I did. So remember, I bought that triplex, which was actually a fourplex, and the tenants called, the fire department, the city was involved, all that kind of stuff. So I learned a lot with my own money, but it wasn't that stressful, right? Because at the time, it's my money. So I'm not necessarily worried about it too much, because I can always make more. But that's kind of one stress level. And then what I didn't mention is, before, when I purchased like a pre-construction condo, I was extremely worried about what happens if I don't find a tenant. I'm going to be out like $1,200 a month, right? That's going to be crazy. So I think by going gradually, it helps to put things into perspective. Because I think if a person buys a giant property right away, they just don't understand how these things can go wrong, how quickly, right? And it's like you buy 100 doors and you have to pay an extra $2,000 to do your electrical. That's $200,000 versus like you mess up something on a duplex and it's $4,000. Yeah, you probably have that, no problem. You don't have to go back to the investors, explain like what happened, right?
Yeah.
And then if you can sleep at night doing that, I would say gradually, and a lot of people don't talk about that. I think that aspect of it, that how are you going to be able to be okay investing, and then how is that going to integrate into your life? Because the money is there, but will you be happy? Will you show up happy to your wife and your kids as this investor that you created yourself to be? So now every decision I make in life, I look at myself and thinking, is this the life I want to have in the next few years?
Yeah.
Versus, do I want an extra $1 million? Because it's money is great. I think it's not, for me at least, it's not the number one driver. It's to have a great life.
Sure. Yeah. And how are you doing that? Like, this is the question that I always ask, I guess, multifamily investors. How are you able to have the life that you want through owning real estate? Because you're rich on paper, but that doesn't always translate to monthly income. What have you been able to do to kind of not have the stress of paying for the bills every month by having that money coming in?
You know what? I actually realized maybe almost 7 years ago, just by luck, that I was already financially free if I wanted to. If I wanted to sell everything, I would be, and then just invest it at some point, then I would be okay. So every year since then, I kind of remind myself, you know what, at any point I can stop, and then that's it. I'll be okay. So that helps. Then at the beginning, when I started doing this more full time, I put a fairly significant amount, I would say a year's salary, into my bank account. And then I said, you know what, if this runs out, I can sell this personal property, this one, and that one. And then that's kind of the game continuously. Let me see if I can kind of keep that money in the bank. You can pick a number, whatever is comfortable for you, right? For some people, maybe 50,000, for some people, 100,000. And then how can I make money to keep that 100 or 50 in my bank account? And I know it's not great to keep money in the bank account. It's eroding away. but it's more about your mindset. How do you make yourself comfortable? Right? So the old days, my mentor was telling me he used to keep, $300 in his wallet to always feel like he had money, right? Now you don't need to do that because you pay with, but that same mentality is still there. So if you need to keep a certain amount of money in the bank to say, you know what, to be able to confidently tell your family we'll be okay. We won't need to, not go on vacation this year because I've decided to do this venture. So that, and then how do you make money? I mean, in multifamily, there's 100 different ways to do it.
Yeah. Can you just maybe share your way? Because I had, do you know Casey Wong? Have you heard of him?
You know what? I don't know him directly.
Yeah. Anyway, he's a multifamily investor as well. He was here recently, and he said that he basically bought one student rental, which was, I think, 18 units and multiple bedrooms in each unit. And he pretty much lives off of that building. Like he doesn't pay down, he doesn't refinance that building. He just re-amortizes. And so his payments coming down every couple years, and his cash flow is increasing, and he's using that cash flow to fund his life. So that was like a pretty creative, pretty cool way that I haven't really heard anyone else share. Just out of curiosity, what's your way? Are you just like taking acquisition fees, or have you set yourself up in a different way to get that income from your properties?
So I would say the simplest of the ways is I have a herd of buildings that keep running, and then I kill the slowest one, right? I take the slowest one that I can, and then a property that isn't performing as well, or maybe has a lot of equity, and now I can sell it, and then that's more in the early days, and then that can probably be a salary for a few years. If we sell that one, and then there's acquisition fees, and then cash flow too. Like some of the properties I started investing in 15 years ago, they're cash flowing pretty well.
So you don't really refinance them too much?
I refinance some of them, but I would say those are now I still have some residential, and they're like I would say they're like the stepchildren, right? Where I don't really pay attention because they're my own. So they kind of do their own thing, but that's not the business. So the business are the multifamily properties. Yeah. So I pay little attention, but they do cash flow. Yeah. They're probably not run very extremely efficiently. Yeah. But if I paid a lot of attention, I could probably squeeze another 10% of cash flow out of them. But it's not really where. That's not really where my focus is at the moment.
Well, does it make sense for you to reposition your portfolio to sell those little ones off and maybe like take the equity from 2 or 3 of them and buy a big building, or even just use all the equity to buy a massive building?
Absolutely, it does. So I'm selling them slowly. It's just I don't want to have a big tax hit because a lot of them are owned personally. Okay. So selling them slowly, and then there's no rush, I would say. There's money coming in from investors, so there's always opportunities to buy buildings at this point.
Yeah. Speaking of investors, this is one thing I want to kind of pick your brain on, but when it comes to ROI and presenting that to an investor, can you kind of break down what numbers you look at? Because I think that ROI can be looked at differently depending on who you ask. Like generally, I think you factor in the appreciation, cash flow, and the mortgage pay down, right? Those would be kind of like the 3 things to look at. I don't know if you disagree, but do you also factor in the equity that's available in the building on refi, or how do you look at it?
So I know a lot of financial advisors, they talk about IRR. I try to keep it simple because I find that most people, if you ask them, how do you calculate an IRR on a building without a calculator? Nobody knows, right? Yeah. Because it's magic. But I keep it on an ROI perspective. So then over a period of a year, yes, you get appreciation, you have mortgage pay down, you have forced appreciation, which is, I think, most important for me because we're always, just like a lot of other multifamily investors, forcing value of the buildings. So I borrow money from investors if they want something shorter and more predictable, or put investors into equity plays. And if it's a deal that's larger, and we have a bunch of investors, then we just follow a plan, like a 5 to 6 year plan, and there is no really wiggle room around it. But if it's let's say you get 3 large investors, then that know each other, then at the end of, let's say, 2 years, 3 years, we discuss, hey, what do we do next with this building? Do we refinance? But so yes, all of that gets kind of factored into an ROI.
Okay. What about the, I don't know if you covered that. I don't think I heard that, but equity, is that a factor? Like, let's say you're getting a 80% loan to value CMHC loan on the refi. That 20% that's left in the building, is that factored into the ROI calculation?
For a typical deal, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay.
So then we're expected to actually sell the asset at the end of the 5 to 6 years, if we're following like a typical plan.
Okay. So you factor in the equity you have only if you're selling the asset? Is that what you're saying?
Well, to keep it simple,
Yeah.
I basically say for a typical plan, yes, to sell the asset.
Okay. And do you run your ROIs using 5-year terms, or are you looking at like a 10-year term? How are you doing an average over that period of time, or how do you look at it?
I do 5-year, because if you talk to an investor and tell them you want a 21-year investment, they likely won't invest with you. And I would say ROI isn't. It is a little bit important, but it's not necessarily like a top thing, or top 2 or 3 things that investors look for anyway. Mm-hmm. So that's why I don't invest too much time into thinking, are we going to do IRR, to presenting to this investor, ROI. This is basically the plan. We're going to refinance somewhere in the middle, and then sell the building year 5 or 6.
Right. Okay. So I guess the average person probably doesn't really care that much about ROI. Maybe like a more sophisticated investor would be more about the numbers if they really understand how that stuff works. Is that kind of what you're saying?
I'm saying that people they're nervous to invest with other people. Mm-hmm. So that's why majority, 95% of people will go and invest with TD Bank or Royal Bank at 4%, mm-hmm. then invest with you at 12, 13, 14%, because they don't want to lose their money. Mm-hmm. So people are, whether you give them 12 or 14 or whatever, that's not their top concern. They just don't want to lose their money.
Yeah.
And no matter how great of a deal you have, if a 13% ROI, or sorry, a 30%, it doesn't matter. They'll take the 3 with Royal Bank if you're a new investor, or if you don't have a brand around, and then you don't have proven track record.
Sure.
So it could fluctuate by, it could be up or down by 5%. It won't even matter mm-hmm. at the beginning.
Yeah. How often would you say you sell the asset after 5 years? Is that the majority of the time, or do you hold on to some of them? Do you buy investors out?
So I would say half and half. So on a latest building I'm looking to refinance, I've actually bought the investors out on it. We'll buy next year when we refinance, and because I like the asset, I like the area, and why not? And then I know that the investors will want to kind of move on from that one and invest into something else, because as you know, the biggest lift on the biggest ROI is in the first few years, when you're renovating the units, when you're getting the income up. Mm-hmm. But later, you don't get that kind of sharp increase.
Sure.
It's more of a steady kind of eddy type of asset. But I still like it, so why not? I know it's well maintained. Mm-hmm. Right? We work very hard on it.
Yeah, and when you are acquiring some of these buildings, what are some of the key things that you look for that make a deal worth it? Like, are you negotiating vacant units? Is there anything in particular as part of the negotiations that you find are important to make the deal worthwhile?
So, for me, the individual, unlike a REIT, they're not as particular about the specific deal. It's more about how that fits into their portfolio. But we got to be extremely specific in terms of what we're getting, which means that it has to have potential to uplift it significantly very early on in the first 2-3 years. So if it has vacancies, great, but I don't find too many of those. There are some, few in between, but on the other hand, if it has vacancies, then the lending side will be a little bit more difficult, right? So there's like pluses or minuses. So what I look for is for the uplift. I don't necessarily, the vacancies are not that important for me. It's got to be in the 3 cities where we invest in, or kind of that triangle. So we're investing in Kitchener, Hamilton, and London, and I call that the golden triangle, where we invest and we have our team. But yes, so we buy buildings built in the 1960s that are not wooden construction, flat roofs, right? That have opportunity for value add, are in, I would say they're not distressed properties, they're in average communities, and have opportunity for us to lift them up. It gets 10 times more specific than that, but that's why it's not so easy to buy assets. And then I'm buying things that I know my investors will want to buy, because they are, unlike a fund, they're actual owners of a piece of a building, which is advantageous as long as you have a good asset. Because if you don't have a good asset, then that will be a problem, because they own then, 20% of a crappy building. You don't want that. You want to own 20% of a great building.
Right. Do you stay away from brick buildings? Is it just concrete construction that you go after?
No, actually, majority are brick buildings.
Oh, okay.
I don't stay away from those.
Okay, perfect.
At all.
Properties that are built, you said 1960s?
Around there, because I do have a few that were built in the early 1900s. There are some apartment buildings in Hamilton that were built in 1900s. But I find that they're very costly to operate. And the plumbing and the electrical, in 1900s, they probably assumed you had one kettle and something, versus now everybody's got 16 devices each, right?
Yeah.
It's a very different world. So, and then they don't have these great layouts. They have these fire escapes in the back that are kind of leaning over and ready to die.
Yeah.
I'm not. So I've have some. They were inefficient. They weren't as great of an asset over a longer period of time, and then just a headache around them. I decided not to. But that's my model. That doesn't mean like you could be an expert in those buildings and hire trades that know how to make those buildings amazing, and then all of a sudden you got a great investment.
Sure. And speaking of those older buildings, a lot of times during those days they used to use asbestos or products that had asbestos in them. That could be like ceiling tiles, floor tiles, even paint, all sorts of stuff. Have you ever run into a situation where you had asbestos and it was costly to, remediate or whatever?
I didn't have. So I've had some. I had like asbestos, knob and tube wiring. You name it in these buildings. We try to remediate those situations least cost effectively. Sometimes there are even tiles on the floor, but you can cover them up and such. So it happens, but more so in the older properties.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just because I had a situation where, I was getting a phase 1, and the guy that's doing the phase 1, he arrived early, and a tenant in the building, he started talking to him, and he told him that he's the super, so he lied. He's a troublesome tenant, and he started telling him about asbestos and mold and all sorts of things that are in the building. And so now he's marking this down, and they kind of flagged it. They flagged it in the phase 1, right? So I'm just thinking, if that's probably going to be an issue when it comes to financing, because they're going to want to see some reports, I'm assuming, on that stuff, right? I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but
you know what? It's tenants will, some tenants, so they're a minority, they'll do all sorts of things, and then I got every story you could you could have around tenants.
Yeah.
Right, but some people will do that. It's just a small portion of people. I've gone through phase 1s and then phase 2s. I've never entered a phase 3, which is so just for the listeners' background, phase 1 is more like an easy environmental that needs to be done, and it's not very costly on a multifamily building. Then if they find something like for me, specifically this building, there used to be a gas station in Hamilton in the 70s. Mm-hmm. But it turns out that the gas station was, it's gone since the 90s. So that's 30 years ago, but still it warranted a phase 2. So phase 2, they needed to actually drill soil samples to figure out if the site is contaminated. And if it was contaminated, we might have to remediate. So they went on and then they drilled. And then the contamination numbers, that tolerance is extremely small. Mm-hmm. Like it's crazy small. So they drilled and then they found something. And then I thought, I just spent like months, and then I was probably about 30 some odd thousand into this building. And it's my own money, so I never put investor money into the initial phase. Mm-hmm. So either way, whether it's their money or my money, it would hurt quite a bit. But I put my own money in just so they don't have to be involved in that. So then they said, you know what? Maybe we drilled it wrong, so because there's certain procedures around it. So we'll take another sample. So they took another sample. And then thankfully that sample was okay. Mm-hmm. So don't ask me how to sample soil, but they did it and it was okay. If that second sample didn't come out clean, we would have to actually clean up the site before purchasing. No lender would take the building if it was a contaminated site before it was remediated. Remediations can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Because they basically have to dig up the soil and replace it with new soil, right?
I don't know what they have to do because we didn't end up going down that route. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know how they got that contamination there. It was figured out. And then think about it, gas station 30 years ago, right? How crazy is that?
Yeah.
So in phase 1, that's what triggered it. They found there was a gas station.
Right. That's what they usually do, right? They'll do kind of their research, Google Maps, look at the history of the site, see if there was ever any gas stations, if there's any potential for contamination. And then based on that, they might go and start digging on phase 2. How long anyway does phase 1 and phase 2 last? Like, let's say you did one initially, and then you went to refinance a few years later. Can you reuse that, or they would probably need a fresh one?
You know what? For that specific one, because it was a phase 2 required, they said the phase 2 is good for 18 months. Mm-hmm. So your finance, if it's going to be, in my case, later than 18 months, then you need to refresh it.
Yeah.
But yeah, all sorts of stuff needs to be found. Yeah. Like earlier in my life, I bought a 7-plex in London, and then the city said they need a rental license, right? But apparently you don't need a rental license if it's 5 units or more.
Right.
But they said this building is kind of a grandfathered, and it's actually not a purpose-built building, which they're right. Mm-hmm. And they said, well, we went back to 1932, and it happens to be a duplex. So what are you doing with a 7-plex? I've had this property for years.
Yeah.
And what triggers a city to do that? Well, what happened was a tenant called the city, not our property management team, that they had a tiny little leak in the roof, like from the ceiling. So instead of calling us, they called the city. City sent an inspector. The inspector did a whole inspection of the entire property and said, you know what, this used to be a duplex. But it's been around forever.
Yeah.
Forever. So then you got to apply for rental licensing and then all that kind of mess, right, on the building. So they'll find interesting things. And they're never towards your benefit.
Yeah. of course. I mean, they want to collect those rental fees, I'm sure, right? As much as possible.
Yes. I won't go too deep on, but that's their job. That's what they do, and if it's for the best of us, I don't know.
Yeah.
I would say that I would prefer less control than more, but that's what the city decides. So
Yeah, for sure. Why don't we just really quickly talk about what you're doing to improve units? Are you, like, generally with these buildings that you have, are you doing full guts, or are you just sprucing units up as much as possible to just lift the rent as efficiently as possible?
I would say a mix. So sometimes we actually gut entire floors of buildings if that floor doesn't seem to be like if it's weird layouts, or if the units are too big or too small, then definitely, especially if it's a much older building. I know a lot of people just like to do the minimum and the paint and such, but really if you're looking for a top tenant, and then if you're looking to increase the value, then a little bit more than paint needs to be done. So anything from gutting floors to basically gutting units, individual, and keeping them the same, maybe moving a couple walls and such.
Maybe like converting from a 1-bedroom to a 2-bedroom or something like that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Gotcha.
Kind of, adding washer dryers and then such to the units.
Yeah. Before we got started, you said that there's this kind of idea that, owning a duplex is the same as owning a 5-plex and the same as owning a 50-unit building. But you're saying that there's, a difference in the mindset required for these types of properties. So why don't we dive into that a little bit?
Okay. I don't know. So I don't know how people stand up and then look at you and say, oh, you know what? Owning 100 doors is the same owning as 50 doors. It's the same owning as 6. Because I actually found it's not. It's a huge difference. Owning like 7-8 unit properties, and when you use a lot of people talk about OPM. I say MYM, my own money. When you're investing in your own money with smaller properties, the mistakes you can make are big, and then they don't cascade across many different units. But then when you're buying very large units and you're buying it with other people's money, OPM, and then facing bigger problems, it's a completely different game. It turns into like a full-fledged business instead of like a side retirement fund thing.
Yeah.
Which used to be for me. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's still challenging, it's still cool to do. It's just there is no time for a day job.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Like there is if you own a few small plexes, triplexes, fourplexes, and such.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, it is kind of scary when you do control other people's money, because like sometimes it's everything they have, and you kind of carry that burden, right, as the investor. Like you got to make sure you're doing the right thing, you're making the right decisions, you've ran your pro formas properly, you've done your due diligence. You can't really take any chances when it comes to other people's money. Like you said, if it's your own, I feel like I'm more willing to lose a little bit or take risks, because if I lose, it's okay, I can get it back in the future. But it's not always the case when you're playing with other people's money.
You know what? I would say that's my number one concern I think about every single day. There hasn't been a day for years which I haven't thought about other people's money that I'm using, because you don't know how hard people work for their money, right? Like investors invest with you, but they may forego a family vacation. Right? So this isn't just like play money for a lot of people. Yes, a lot of people have too much money and then they'll invest with you, and it's all fun. But for majority of people, they sacrifice a lot to invest. And then I have few of those investors. So So for me, I think that would be a nightmare to lose people's money.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So like I think about that and then plan and then take every single precaution so that doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
I think, you're investing, you're not, many people are investing with strangers, but a lot of people are investing with friends and family, and so am I.
Mm-hmm.
So can you imagine how you look at your friends and family if you lost their money? They'll never talk to you again.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, probably.
It's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Yeah, for sure.
So thinking about that, and then, okay, so that's the tough side of it. But we're investing in good communities, in good assets, doing the right things, and then we're making money. And yes, everybody's happy in the end.
Mm-hmm.
But keep that always kind of stays in the back of my head. So when thinking about becoming a full-time investor, maybe you won't take it as seriously. I don't know, maybe I'm overcomplicating it. But that's what it takes if you're going to use other people's money and then invest full-time.
Yeah. What would be some ways you think that you can lose an investor's money? Would it be like, overlooking a major issue in a building, like a foundation problem or like a soil contamination or something that would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars? Or what would be some other ways you think that you can lose money on a deal?
I think some people will over leverage, like, borrow money to the max. So then they're cash flowing negative extreme amounts, and they don't project that into the equation. Interest rates may go up. It's pretty simple. Interest rates go up. You're on a variable mortgage. You haven't accounted for the extra $200,000. You don't have it, and then boom, you see a property. Like I saw a property the other day where they, it's like half renovated building, right? They put a lot of money in, but it's not really worth what they put in, and then there's a problem. Then some people go into distressed markets, and they don't take into account what maybe they wouldn't lose money, but not earn as much money, because some of those areas they don't appreciate too well, like distressed areas, and people don't underestimate tenants. Those tenants are tough.
Yeah.
And not everybody wants to work with them. You get a property manager, and after a couple months, you'll say, you know what? I'm not doing this. My people are stressed out.
Yeah.
So that, but I would say over leveraging is really key.
Yeah. And I guess maybe taking on a building where a lot of tenants aren't paying rent, where you're kind of carrying that, and with the LTV being so slow and whatnot, maybe that's another potential risk to consider.
Yeah. Even people talk about like the new MLI program that came out. To get to the top efficiency, it is extremely costly. And if you haven't budgeted for that, you kind of start, but then figure out, you know what, we actually don't have the money to go through with this. So we won't be able to get a certain level of efficiency, and we won't be able to refinance. So now you've dumped a bunch of money into the building.
Yeah. Makes sense. Just to finish things off, do you feel like there are any last minute or kind of a last message you'd want to share to the people that are listening that are interested in commercial multifamily that want to get into the space?
I think I've talked a lot about kind of heavier subject, but the cool thing about investing is, at least for me, is how much freedom I have. So I love really waking up in the morning, and then yes, I have meetings, but I've set those meetings, and then I decide what to do with my day. So I really love that. And then if today is a day where I go to the buildings versus kind of sit in the office or talk to the people on the ground, that's what I decide to do. So and then seeing really yourself impact not only investors but also the community in a positive way, right? Because we're buying assets that are average with some sketchy tenants at times, and then the community around afterwards, once you improve the building, I mean, they're they're thankful for that.
Mhm.
And then also for us, we have special programs for new immigrants to rent units, to be able to do that for families like my situation was. That's pretty cool to do.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome. One last thing I want to ask you: do you feel like the stress levels around being an investor, do they kind of come down over time, or do they stay the same? Do they increase as you buy more buildings? What are your thoughts on that?
So my very first property was a condo, like a pre-construction condo, and then 2 months before 2 months before I would get it, I was freaking out. I didn't know what would happen if I can't get a tenant the first month or two. Yeah. I'm gonna be out $1,200, right? And then obviously that's no longer a concern. So I think we're humans are resilient. We definitely learn. It's just a question of kind of getting used to the new normal. Right. And then if you're anything like me, you want to continue, and then you're never kind of happy or satisfied completely with personal growth, with staying where you are, then you increase it, you get used to it, and then you kind of continue on. Right. It's more of a step by step thing.
Yeah.
And then keeping in mind how much your family tolerate, because your family is an incredible support system.
Yeah.
Right. So if my wife wasn't on board, definitely this would be a harder journey. But I'm very grateful that she's been supportive every step of the way. And then, we had the conversations early on. I asked her, what would happen if I lose all our money? She said, when I met you, you had a car with holes in it. Like it was rusty.
What, bullet holes or
like like normal rust holes.
Okay.
Right? And so and then we had $80,000 debt when we graduated university. So don't worry about it, right? And then that kind of foundation is really important to keep that investor journey like on a happy kind of level.
Sure.
Right?
Sure. Cool. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming here and sharing your story and spending the time with me today. Do you just want to tell people how they can reach you and what services you're offering?
Absolutely. So go to my blog, mikebeer.ca/blog. We have an investor circle, which we educate around multifamily. So that's at mikebeer.ca/circle. And then if you like a quick strategy session to chat, then definitely that's on the website as well.
Awesome, Mike. Thank you so much for coming by, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Well Off Podcast. If you enjoy the show, then I'd really appreciate if you left us a review on iTunes and let us know your thoughts. In order for us to get a larger audience, it's really important to have reviews, so your support is extremely appreciated. And also, don't forget to share the podcast with your friends and family. Until next time, I'm George Almasri. Have a great day.